Got it. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to What to Expect from Leadership Circle Profile Certification. I'm Jonathan Hulsh, VP of Leadership Circle, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. Our goal is to help you make an informed decision about certification to see if it's really right for you. This is going to be a 1-hour webinar with 15 additional minutes for Q&A. For the first part, my colleague Mike and I will provide an overview of the Leadership Circle and the certification experience. I'm also very pleased to have Vandana Ram joining us today. Vandana is a guest host, a Leadership Circle community member, and a coach practitioner who's going to bring some unique viewpoints to this conversation. We also plan to address questions that we often hear from people considering certification. So although you'll have them waiting for us, we're probably going to answer many of them before you even get to that. Towards the end of today's webinar, we'll also leave time to answer any questions that we haven't gotten to. Please use the chat function anytime to answer questions, and we're going to do our best to answer them in the Q&A session. And I'd like you to take a moment right now to start the chat. Please list one question, maybe more if you're fast, that you're hoping we're going to cover today. And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds starting now. We should be wrapping it up. And here we are. Before you even consider attending certification, you may want to know something about the heart and soul of the Leadership Circle. This is our mission, and we take it very seriously, meaning we're sticking to it. We exist to evolve the conscious practice of leadership, to steward the planet, and awaken us all to our inherent unity. This mission lives in the heart of all of our offerings, and it lights the way that we work with all of our clients. For decades, Leadership Circle has certified thousands of coaches and consultants like you. They practice around the world, and now we have the assessment translated into 19 languages. During this journey, we've learned why these practitioners have relied on Leadership Circle Profile. What are the top 3 benefits? Here's what they've said. They find it to be more impactful, giving them deeper coaching conversations and engagements. They're able to have more focus and efficiency in identifying key themes. And we offer TLC resources that support action planning and development journeys. As a result, they enjoy broader client impact, and they're able to attract new clients and keep the ones they've got. So I ask you to ask yourself today, would you like to have more impactful and deeper coaching conversations, more efficiency in identifying key themes, and the resources to support action plans and development journeys? And finally, would you like to have broader client impact and be able to attract new clients? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, please stick around. In the next few minutes, you're going to meet Vandana Ram, a certified coach from our community. She's going to describe how she has experienced these benefits personally. Certification starts with the first step, of course, registering. It's a 7-step dynamic process. It's not just about the training. The second step, you're going to complete pre-work with an online portal called Adeption that facilitates learning and includes the support of a virtual coach. These Adeption workouts or exercises are going to prepare you for your 360 assessment. You're going to get feedback from other people. You're going to start setting it up. And this is the same process you're going to learn to engage in with your clients. You'll be learning this at certification, and you'll be doing this with your clients. Step 3, with the help of Adeption workouts, you're going to review your 360 results. You're going to gain insights, and this prepares you for your debrief with your coach. Step 4, you're going to receive a 90-minute debrief personal feedback on your 360 report with one of our Leadership Circle coaches. This is a personal experience, and it's designed to deepen and accelerate your knowledge of the program. You're going to then continue with adaptation workouts to prepare you for the live virtual training. Step 5, there it is. It's the live training. Now, this is typically held in a 3-day full day program, each of those 3 days, or 4 partial days. It's virtual. We offer these once or twice a month, and they come across different time zones. So if you look at the calendar, choose a time zone that's convenient for you. Step 6, you're going to complete post-adaptation workouts online with adaptation. We've done this to help reinforce everything you've learned at the certification program, including the debrief, including the pre-work, including taking your 360. In addition to this, step 6, you'll get access to hundreds of resources that will support your use of the profile. Step 7 is, it's done. You're certified, and there'll be a certificate waiting for you. To be certified, we ask that you complete all the steps I've talked about in their respective order and be present for the training session from beginning to end. Certification is a deeply engaging experience. It can be serious fun, but it also offers something unexpected. It's a benefit. As it teaches you how to use Leadership Circle profile in your client's development, it's also designed to support your own development. This is a wonderful surprise by many participants. Now I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Mike O'Connor, Leadership Circle's Vice President of Business Development. Mike's going to describe what to expect at our live certification training sessions and the many ways Leadership Circle supports you after certification. Mike, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. It's good to be with all of you. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to give you a high-level summary of some of the common questions we get before introducing our guest speaker, V. But as Jonathan had mentioned, when we think about the certification, the learning actually occurs before you attend the virtual 3-day session. So imagine going through the experience of getting raters to evaluate you, giving you feedback, and working with a senior coach who's experienced to then debrief you on your Leadership Circle data. You have all of that roughly a week before attending the session. And it's all fresh. So when you're in the 3-day certification, you'll be learning the process that you literally just experienced a week or so prior. And as Jonathan had mentioned, of course, you're going to learn everything necessary to be proficient in using the Leadership Circle profile as part of your coaching practice. But people oftentimes say, wow, I expected that, but I didn't expect to get such a deep, meaningful, personal insight through all of it as well. Not to mention just meeting some awesome new people. Our workshops tend to get 15 to 20 people each time. And we oftentimes just hear that you meet lifelong friends and colleagues along the way. So I'm going to just start addressing a few of the questions along the way. And while Jonathan was opening up, I was peeking at some of the chat comments. So I'll start hitting some of those. So the goals are to help you learn how to use the Leadership Circle as part of your practice. And I want to emphasize, you are an experienced coach. You got your way of doing things. While we'll offer you processes and suggestions, it's very agnostic. You can use the Leadership Circle in whatever way you lean your practice into. So there's a lot of flexibility. But we also have you working on your own development, because many of us know the very best coaches are those of us who are continuing to do our own work. In the certification, you will spend most of day one reflecting on the experience you had as a leader and some of your experiences going through the debrief experience. And with that, you'll get a deeper dive orientation to a few of the things that are unique about the Leadership Circle. You'll want to know, and if this is brand new to you, you can go onto our website and find this easily. The whole way the Leadership Circle is modeled, and the model is set up with creative competencies at the top, and then reactive tendencies at the bottom, and then there's 2 sides, relationship and task. The creative competencies are energy generating, and research shows the more a leader does of these, the more they're perceived as an effective leader, the more likely they are to contribute to business outcomes that matter. So more creative is good. And one might think, and it's a common question, that must mean the reactive is bad. And that's not the case. We all have things we've learned along the way. For those of you that know stages of adult development, we all have to go through the reactive place where our perception and our narrative identity is informed by others in our early career years and such. But as we continue to grow and make a bigger mark in the world, we can start to self-author. And so the reactive tendencies are bad, but they can slow us down. And being aware of them and learning how to manage them is really the invitation there. There's 29 dimensions all across. You're going to become intimately familiar with all of those. Each of those are behaviorally based. They're all based on sound research, and they're all strategies and developmental strategies that you'll become aware of on any one of them, whether it's your development process or a leader you're serving as a coach, as they say, boy, I don't quite know what to do about this arrogance I'm feeling or dealing with, or I don't know why people are perceiving me as not being interpersonally intelligent. You can actually find some good resources in something called the Profile Interpretation Manual. Along this way, you'll be doing a lot of interpretation practice, looking at fundamental, common feedback reports. You're going to start to get into some of the unusual nuances when there's gaps between a leader's self-evaluation and that of others, where there's places that have extraordinarily high energy in one area and it's a little off balance. So you'll do a lot of interpretation, and then you'll also get several rounds of practicing a debrief process, which we introduce. And then finally, we wrap up on day 3, talking about, what are the possible development trajectories? Ideally, this is a part of your coaching practice. People find value in the assessment coupled with how you present the assessment to them and their feedback, and you can put that into an ongoing coaching engagement. And then we talk about the development resources to help support that. So that's a high-level summary about what the 3-day virtual certification is about. When people comment to us about the personal insights, they're really like, oh my gosh, I'm really learning new ways about how I'm really showing up. And they're really starting to get some new and clever ways in how they want to do their development. Some people in our community know it as the narrative identity, the story I tell myself about who I am, or the story I tell myself about the world with which I live, and starting to rethink and determine where am I empowered to make choice and perhaps change my strategies to kind of rethink to have patterns that perhaps will serve me better going forward. I'll tell you, I joined the Leadership Circle 10 years ago. I went through certification maybe a year prior, and I was in my mid-40s at the time and had been a coach for decades. I had some extraordinary insights as a result of Leadership Circle, just new ways of looking at it, because for the first time, I was looking at it from a lens of both the creative competencies as well as some of the reactive tendencies that are embedded in me and can tend to drive me if I'm not paying attention. So we hope that that's something that you all will experience as well. And certainly we hope that that'll be what your clients will be saying about their experience with you. One thing that got me excited before I joined the organization, and it continues to be true, our senior leaders and partners made a decision years ago that we were going to differentiate ourselves in the market, in this very crowded market with all these 360s in a few different ways. The Leadership Circle and how it's created and founded is one of the differentiators with the creative and the reactive. A second significant differentiator is how we support our clients after they're certified. I'll be brief, but if you'll just know, we are well set up as an organization. We've got a team to include the customer care team, just these amazing people who are really familiar and intimate. They love getting to know community members, and they're there to answer all your questions about how to launch a Leadership Circle profile. Here's a profile that's kind of looking a little unusual. I need some hand holding, some refresh, whatever. And then I manage the business development team. Whether you are inside an organization and want to perhaps put the Leadership Circle within a system that has all other talent management elements to it, we can kind of help create a seamless, well-aligned system. For those of you that are individual practitioners and you run your own businesses, some of you I know love the coaching part, but don't necessarily feel as confident in getting new business. So we've got marketing resources, proposal templates, all sorts of tutorials. Jonathan mentioned there's a place where you'll find hundreds of resources. Many of those we create ourselves, others are created from community members, but we're here to help you not only get your certification achieved, but also get you off on a good front so you can speak confidently about this to future customers. And you can confidently address frequently asked questions. You can deploy it with confidence so you'll have a client experiencing a very positive experience as you're going through their data with them. And those are all available to people who are certified. We have a lot of online resources and they're growing all the time. So our website alone, you could go on there and just find a lot of white papers, video testimonials, case studies, and so forth. What you haven't seen yet, but once you're certified, you also have access to something called Leadership Circle Go. And that's a special portal that has extra resources available for those of you who invest in our community. You know, the FAQs, the best practices, video testimonials, things in a variety of languages and so forth. Many people know us. We published a couple of books. Mastering Leadership came out in 2016, a big hit. A few years later, Scaling Leadership came. Both of those are extraordinarily well-received books that really talk about the deep details, but not only what this assessment is about, but how to put it into organizations so organizations can scale in a collective way. And then we have lots of regional communities that we'll talk more about later. One of the questions in the chat was about the ongoing learning. First of all, where things currently are, if you're certified with the Leadership Circle, you are certified for life. We hope and expect that you will do things to keep yourself current. We help you with that with ongoing webinar series, ongoing blogs, postings, announcements, new tools, new resources, updates. All those things are always available to you. So you've got lots of different ways to keep the learning alive, whether you're a person who likes to learn just going in online and finding things, or if you like to do it in a group session. We have a very active community. I don't know, there must be, well, there's well over 9,000, maybe 10,000 certified people across the world. We have practitioners across the whole world, I think 61 different countries. And we have different learning groups set up, virtual study groups, different LinkedIn communities. So once you're certified, you can also get access to a local community. And you know, there's also, you know, just, you know, for those of you that are in the States, you know, here in Charlotte, North Carolina, there's a group of about 22 of us that get together on occasion. We've got a huge population where V is. V's up in the DC metro area. I think we have 700 plus people in DC. And they don't seem to ever step on each other's toes. There's plenty of work for any of those. Different places of the world just have different pockets. We're happy to get you connected with those communities. Eligibility. Because we do not teach coaching, it is expected that people who join us have expertise and experience in coaching around leadership development. That could be an accreditation, an ICF credential, perhaps a graduation from a coaching school, or it could be just, you know, years of relevant experience, you know, doing this work within a practice or within your organization. So we want to make sure that you are coming into an experience where it's assumed and understood that you're already have credibility. You don't need to learn the coaching piece. So we can then overlay the Leadership Circle process and instrument on top of what you do. We also expect when you're in a certification that you can feel confident those others that you're going through the certification experience with also have a similar background to you. Now, if there's any questions, we're happy to discuss it with you. And that's a role that Jonathan plays, the gentleman who opened the session up. So if you'd like to know more, just kind of double check, get a little bit more detail about what the certification does and doesn't cover. He's in a really good position to guide you, direct you, see if it's the right match. Again, the interest here in this session is for you to make an informed decision about whether this is right for you or not. And some of you might say, just what I needed, I'm ready to register. We'll show you how to do that. Others of you might say, I'm not sure, I've got some questions and they weren't all covered here. Put a message into the chat and Amanda and Carly will be capturing all those and we will split those up and we will follow up with you. We'd be happy to have a one-on-one conversation about anything regarding this whole experience. I'm going to hit just a couple of frequently asked questions after. Hold on, just looked at my script. With that, I'm going to pause. I'd like to take a moment and introduce our guest speaker, Vandana. I met V, her friends call her V. I met her in a certification back in 2018. And we're really pleased that you're here. She's going to share a little bit about her experience as a user and as a super user. One thing that's interesting, she wears two hats like many of you do. She has her own coaching practice, and she also is part of an organization, a consultancy in the healthcare space. So she has both the internal and the external view. And so if you'll kind of listen to what she has to say from that view, you'll get some good perspective. And then she'll stick around through the entirety. If so there's questions at the end, she'll be around for that as well. Hey, so V, if I could just send it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be with all of you today in different parts of the country, in different parts of the world. Grateful to have this opportunity to have a conversation with you. I thought I'd just cover a few items in terms of what it's like to be a coach in this particular space with this particular data set. So here are 2 or 3 areas I'll cover in the next 10 minutes or so, 5 or 10 minutes. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the coaching practice that I have that has both as an internal coach and as an external coach. I'd like to share with you a little bit about what it is that our clients are finding most helpful about the Leadership Circle profile. But I also want to tell you from a coaching perspective what I find most helpful about the Leadership Circle profile, because I think it's at that intersection that really it's important to discuss, because that's where the conversations around productivity and impact on organization become really clear. I'll talk a little bit about partnerships and how to bring clients in using this particular data set. And then I'll wrap up with any kind of questions that you might have and some of the things that are popping up in chat. I may not perfectly answer them, but I think directionally you'll see the responses I have. Maybe we'll be able to help alleviate or answer into some of those questions and wonderings that you have. I'd start by saying that my coaching practice in the last few years has really shifted to the executive level. And so most of my clients are at the C-suite level, both within industry and also have a big passion for pro bono work. So a significant part of my personal practice, about 20%, is devoted to nonprofit leaders. And so the corporate side pays for in some ways, allows me the space and time to be able to do some work here in Northern Virginia, close to Washington, D.C. So that's a little bit about my practice. And I'd say 2 different things about kind of highlighting what I think the Leadership Circle profile offers. One is evidence and 2 is efficiency. As a small shop, working in some bigger spaces with a lot of volume and a lot of need, I have clients who are saying, are you certified in these kinds of certifications, right? They're already coming in, they know exactly what they want. And so there are big companies with a lot of volume need that come in and say, I'd like to know, are you certified on X, Y, and Z? And Leadership Circle profile happens to be in the market that I'm in a deep desire and is an area of attraction that I already have that certification. What I would also just suggest or share with you in terms of my background is that I really resisted 360 data as a coach, because I think so often it's really about the respondent than about the leader in moment. And so, of course, what's the value of bringing this data forward in this moment in time where most of the time, as you know, as coaches, we're talking with leaders who are in significant transformation, right? Moving into a new role. Their teams are shifting significantly in the last 2 years. The level of complexity that our leaders are having, and currently right now, my leaders mostly are in healthcare. So a significant amount of just trauma that they're having to lead and be with. And so I would tell you, I have searched and searched. A lot of my colleagues will do the deep dive of interviewing hundreds of people to give data, right? These big, thick narrative data sets. And here's what I'm finding is that that's a lot of work. And I'm not sure it gets our leaders and our clients the kind of efficiency gain that says, oh, let me look up the metrics on this. Let me understand what really matters. What are those creative competencies that I can have a taxonomy for and name? How am I doing as it relates to systems awareness? How am I doing as it relates to courageous authenticity? What are my creative tendencies and patterns that I could be pushing up onto? And where is it that my reactive tendencies? So I see that profile. By the way, I'll just don't tell Mike and the others this, but he's listening, so that's all right. He's a good friend. I actually kind of see the world now. The lens I see it through is literally, I'm kind of like looking at the world through the creative competencies and those reactive tendencies. I'm looking at the world for how are we doing in this space and time, whether that it's my dinner table with my teenage children or an executive table that I get to be at. I'm looking at how are we balancing and indexing on relationships and task? Like, are we over indexing on relationship? Are we over indexing on task? And that's the circle in and of itself, right? Like the creative competencies, the reactive tendencies. Are we more task focused? Are we more relationship focused? And that kind of speed that I can get that data, that graphic that Mike put up for you, when I can get that circle with that green bloom in front of a client, all the stuff about how am I showing up in the world just kind of, they just settle. So I love the kind of settling and confidence that it gives. I also love the taxonomy of it. I love the language of it. I love the simplicity of it. So in many ways, I would say that in terms of evidence, so I love being able to say to an organizational leader, when you look at these percentile and these indices, what you're seeing is your score relative to 300,000 people, and the number might be bigger at this point, Mike, but 300,000 other leaders in the database. And there's a predictive component to this, right? So that kind of confidence, I think, and credibility and validity really helps our leaders to know the data set that I'm working from and the moves that I make as a result of consuming and metabolizing this information gives them a ton of confidence. And then the final thing I'd offer is that I really, in 2018 in Washington, D.C., ended up with a group of really dear colleagues and friends, and we went out and got work together. So those people that I got certified with in the Leadership Circle profile, because of the vetting that the Leadership Circle does, because of the level of rigor and credibility, I think that this particular profile has at this moment in this time, which is needed in the world, by the way. I felt like there were people wrapped around that table that I could really go out and get business with. I knew about their level of capability. I knew that they would show up for our clients. And so that has been a significant part is partnerships. And so that allowed me then to be able to hang my own shingle, quite honestly, and have the confidence. Because as a small shop, I can't do interview after interview after interview and trust myself to do the qualitative coding and have a beautiful kind of metric-based visual and a report that I can give to a leader and say, it'll efficiently show up on your desk and let's talk it through. So for me, that was the efficiency gain. And then the final piece I suppose I'll offer is that, and I know there's chat and I'll look at it here in just a second. I have spent quite a bit of time in the space around adult development. This particular profile allows me to take multiple frameworks into one, again, lens. Like this is my lens that I see the world through. That's kind of the aperture, like that's opened up for me is within the data set is embedded this element around where is a leader in their adult development, where is a leader in understanding and having language about the stories and the narrative about how they are being best served by that narrative. What are those deeply held beliefs? And so in some ways, it provides a beautiful roadmap for all it is that we do as coaches to be able to say, okay, so session number 1, we're going to do this, in session 2, and session 3. So it does offer, I think, a roadmap for a conversation and a touchstone. Like we're going to move to some different things and we'll come back and touch this. We'll move to different places, we'll come back and touch this. I would finally just say that most of the leaders I'm working with, when they see this particular data set about themselves, it is, as some would say, it's gutting and jolting and affirming all at the same time. So there is a narrative component to this. It's not, I mean, depending upon how many people offer the narrative, but it's a beautiful chance for others to be able to say, this is the impact of your leadership, and this is my ability to bear witness to your leadership. Mike, what else would be important for me to highlight? I know there are probably some process questions and other things that have popped up, but tell me what additional places you'd like for me to.
Well, I'll tell you, V, we're going to have Carly and Amanda kind of go through and kind of, get all the questions. I've been kind of looking at them in the chat room, but V, if you just had to summarize, why is it you chose Leadership Circle over other assessment options you could choose from?
Honestly, my business could not handle doing the level of interviews. I could not put myself and my partners through interviewing clients so that we could give them reports. And while I think clients love that big, thick narrative report, it's not very efficient and people don't really know what to do. So it's good information, it's rich data, but it's not coded. There's still, I think there's an error rate there that I'm not willing to put my clients through. And I suppose the idea of having this bird's eye view sort of sitting there as a reminder, right? So just like thinking about any behavioral shift, like losing weight, if you gave me a whole book on it, I'm probably not going to do anything about it. That's the technical response. And I think that I had to personally let go of my ego, because I have, so when you look at the reactive tendencies, I'm strong and complying and conservative. And so if you say you want 35 pages, my gosh, I'm going to get you 35 pages at a toll to my business, to my margin, and to my health.
Yeah, there you
And
go.
I got to raise kids and plants. So,
Yeah.
and
I'm
still
going to
show
try
up in
one
a big
more.
way for my leaders, right? So I mean, I keep going back to the efficiency and the efficacy of it, to know that there's data that I can really count on. That for me is like major partnership for a small business.
I appreciate that. One other question from the chat. I might see if you have a point of view on this, and or perhaps think about it. We can get it at the tail end. I know that many of the clients you serve, you're in there doing the work with leaders, and you might be working in partnership with people also within that organization who are also coaches, also using Leadership Circle. So one of the questions was, can this truly be robust and add value for an internal coach within an internal system?
Yeah. Let me think about the best way. I think internally what it does is, when I used it within my own, when I was an employee as a W-2, I used it with my leaders that I was coaching in-house back in 2018. And well, one, each conversation is confidential, period, the end, right? So there's that. And if a leader chooses to share their data with their peers, that is a conversation we absolutely have in the first or second conversation about the report. But that's a choice that they're making, and it's possibly a part of the experiment they're running in terms of what shifts they want to make. I will at some points, actually, the teams will ask at some points, when you look at our collective data, what are the overall patterns and tendencies you see from this group? Do we tend to be highly creative? Do we tend to be highly task oriented? And they'll ask that question. And so as our clients start having the greater utility or use of that language and that lens, I really follow their lead on it. So whether I'm using it internally, again, super clean lines about how to use it and a process around how to use it, or externally, one by one, if I'm working with a client, and sometimes I just have private clients using this particular data set too. My favorite is within the cohort model, where we've got clients over a long period of time, and they're getting to really experiment with their leadership and try out some of those creative competencies in that leadership room, or in that leadership development cohort.
Thank you for that. One side note, you could be working with X number of leaders, let's say 20 leaders on the executive team within an organization. You can also run an aggregate report. So every individual's feedback can be confidential, as we said, but you could also run an aggregate report, get a group view, and that can perhaps be one data source for your needs analysis. With that, thank you so much, V. We're going to continue on, answer some of the common questions, and then we'll open up to an open forum. Am I screen sharing, Amanda? Looks like I am. Okay.
You are.
Who is the intended audience for the Leadership Circle? Surprisingly, we have a very broad definition of leadership. So oftentimes people are like, well, I'm not really a leader because I don't have that position responsibility, or I don't have direct reports. We see leaders, and we've validated the research of the assessments based on people who make meaningful things happen. So it could be anybody. And so with that, we offer two different assessments in our certification. We're here talking about the Leadership Circle profile, which is most recognized. And generally that's towards middle manager, director, and above, generally speaking. And probably about 80% of all daily purchases are with the legacy Leadership Circle profile. We've also got another version called the Manager Edition. And that's for leadership roles that are less complex. So imagine supervisor, foreman, nurse, accountant, still leaders making meaningful things happen, but perhaps their job isn't as complex as some of the leadership roles as it relates to some of the organizational strategy and vision work. So as you're working with an organization, you can make decisions on which of these assessments might best serve. You might also make decisions that for a certain part on the org chart will work with the Leadership Circle profile, and maybe other layers in the organization will work with Manager Edition and USM. So both will be available. Both are there as part of your certification. A couple things that differentiate the Leadership Circle, and again, it's a very crowded market. It just is, for sure. And there are some good ones out there. So generally speaking, if you look at the Leadership Circle framework, The top of our circle, the creative competencies, it doesn't look that different than other competency-based assessments. Korn Ferry, DDI, CCL, they all kind of look the same way in that they're all kind of founded on the same research about what defines effective leadership. What's really unique about the leadership circle is we also get to the underlying assumptions and beliefs, which we call reactive tendencies. Those are those patterns of behaviors, those habits of thoughts, those things we think about that can drive our behavior. And if we're not managing them, imagine a stressful time, a bad Monday, lots of distractions with stuff outside of work, all that stuff that kind of gets me off my game. I can easily fall into, let me just get through my day. Let me just get through this conversation. And so with the reactive tendencies, I can be rather aggressive or blunt. I can be really hyper-focused on results at any cost. I can kind of get quiet and distant. I can get arrogant, conservative, perfectionistic. So what we do is we kind of look at both. And that really is the greatest differentiator with the leadership circle profile. Not listed here, but I saw some questions in the chat. Many will say the leadership circle framework is the most validated leadership instrument around the world. 20 years ago, when our founder, Bob Anderson, created it, he spent 10 years and just did extraordinary research with the objective of creating the first universal model. He wasn't so interested in a 360 originally. He was actually interested in just collecting all the best practices from every possible source. And then in staying true to that, we were constantly re-looking, re-evaluating, double checking things. We're actually in the middle of a pretty significant design initiative right now as the world gets more complex with invitations for diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. It's giving us some new views on how to perhaps invite in creative energy with a new perspective or reactive tendencies. So there's a new research effort to either make changes in the model or provide coaches the right access points so they can carry conversations and respectfully bring in some of those things that might be a priority for an individual leader or an organization overall. So that's just one example. So the validation and the research behind this is extraordinary. And if anybody wants to double check, you can go out to our website. We've got a validation study on our website and a few other things that can kind of give you some confidence in the robustness of this. People like the circle, and there's a lot of 360s out there that have circles, but the circle is just one easy visual to look at everything. And while it could be overwhelming initially, the certified coach quickly helps somebody kind of navigate, look for quick patterns, overarching trends. And then as V had mentioned, there's then a supplemental report, 14, 15 pages to then, when we find an area we're curious about, let's go a little deeper into the report and let's take a look at how you assess yourself, how different evaluator groups assess you and so forth. All of this is an invitation to change my game. And so the invitation with all the busy people you work with is not to boil the ocean, but what are the one or two creative competencies that could best serve in helping you better achieve meaningful things that matter to you at greater scale? So one or two creative competencies and an invitation to look at which one of these reactive tendencies might be slowing you down, might be time to respectfully put off to the side once and for all. Due to my upbringing and lots of different other things, I'm just a high compliant pleaser. I want everybody to be happy. I want everything to be good. I don't want to rock the boat. It's just in my DNA. And I've kind of learned to accept and work around it, kind of see what triggers it. But there are times where it just gets triggered. And when it gets triggered, it looks like over trying, saying yes when I want to say no, overcommitting, not being able to follow through, getting off point on my mission and purpose. So, that's one example. So each of us will have a few developmental priorities, ideally 2 creative and 1 reactive. One thing that was a beautiful surprise, and I had a 20-year career representing a complementary product. It is time efficient. Unlike other instruments that some of you use, you don't have to spend an hour interpreting a report to make the meaning of it. It's all very easily laid out. It's very abundant. It's very fluid. You actually kind of go in and kind of co-create with the leader you're serving. And while you have enough knowledge to know kind of what's important, what needs to be looked at and so forth, you kind of guide the leader you're serving into what does this mean for you and what's important for you. And whatever their context is, organizationally, based on whatever it is, let's bring that into this kind of thing and see which of these data points here is meaning making or of curiosity to you. And so it's extremely flexible. And we want to stress this point. While there is a lot of robustness to this instrument, there's a lot of flexibility in how you deploy it. Again, you were an awesome coach before we met you. So we're bringing in an additional piece that will always be secondary to your coaching skills. And that additional piece is more data to hopefully help you more time efficiently help leaders zero in on those couple of areas that they can use to set their development priority. A few other things. I mentioned the profile interpretation manual. This is an extraordinary resource. There's 29 competencies, and each one has 2 to 3 pages of kind of a foundation of the research. People who are strong in this competency demonstrate behaviors like this. People who are lower might want to focus on this. So as a coach, if you're sitting there and you're working with a leader and their developmental priority is an area that you really don't quite feel like you really know much about, like, I don't know how to make you less arrogant, I'm not sure. The resource guide in the profile interpretation manual is there for both of you to kind of look, explore, get creative, and so forth. So it's really a wonderful piece to support the learning. Now, some of you take your one-on-one coaching and put it towards a group kind of development, ongoing group sessions. Some of you might have training development programs that supplement your offering. Some of you who are internal, you might have alignment with all of your talent management processes, so it aligns to your values or your strategic priorities. This is also a place, like let's find from a group report some overarching trends within your organization with this particular group, and let's go to the profile interpretation manual and kind of create some learning programs to keep the learning alive beyond that of the one-on-one coaching. And ideally, the coaching coupled with the group work is the best 1-2 punch. What do people experience when they do the leadership circle assessment? Well, first of all, it's all online, always. It's always confidential. It's always in your hands. So a leadership circle will not happen without you entering in your password protected site and loading in and administering a project. For those of you who are like me and you don't like doing that kind of stuff, it's also a service that we offer. So when I talk about costs, I'll mention we could also do that for you. But basically, a leader goes in, completes an assessment. It's 124 questions. It takes about 20, 25 minutes. They also then go in and invite evaluators. And those evaluators, ideally 10 to 12 of them, they go through and answer the exact same questions. And somebody who's administering it, you or whoever's assigned to administrate, they're watching progress. So at a given time, when there's enough evaluators that have completed it, you can close the project, close it up, run the report, and that feedback report will go to you, not to anybody else. It'll go to you, and then you will then shepherd the chain of command on how that'll get to the leader you're serving. Another point of differentiation, unlike some instruments out there, your evaluators aren't measuring you on how effective you are at these different domains. Our research is based on frequency. So they're rating you on a frequency scale. Is this something I see in you often, or sometimes, or never? And so that's how we use it. And there's some different ways you could break out your data. So you can have a subgroup with different categories, customers or peers or direct reports and so forth. And then finally, there's 3 open-ended questions that all the evaluators are invited to answer. So there's a lot of good, rich data. And then when the feedback's all completed, the data shows up in 8 or 9 different ways. And they all speak off the same data, but different people learn different ways. So you find the way where it kind of connects with the customer and they can make some meaning and want to go. Just a few other things here, and then we'll pause. Many of our customers want to know about language availability. I know we have people from all over the world on this call. Our profile is currently available in 19 different languages. And when I say the profile, it's the assessment as well as the developmental resources. We also have certifications in some of these languages if some of you are interested in that. One thing's of interest, not long ago, I was debriefing an assessment for a gentleman with Roche Pharmaceuticals, and he had constituents all across the world. He filled his out in English, but he had other evaluators fill it out in Arabic, Italian, and Spanish. And that's fine. Like during the administration, each evaluator he chose, he determined what language would be their preference. And it's the exact same assessment. So the data still rolled up. I am only English speaking, and I could still manage the debrief process with them. And thank goodness for Google Translate, those written comments at the end in a variety of different languages. I could quickly kind of get to the gist of it. So those are some things available to you. Let's talk about cost. As Jonathan has said, our certification is a 3 or a 4 day, just based on options. We offer it twice a year across different time zones. The certification experience is $4,395 US. Those of you that are in different parts of the world, it's complimentary pricing. But if you were to, go to different part of the world, you'll have a different currency, but it'll basically speak to something really comparable to the $4,395. Our friends in Canada, we know there's a really uncomfortable valuation between your dollar and ours. So there's when you click on, be sure to choose Canada, and you'll still get all the same time zones as the US, but you'll have a different price point just to appreciate the fluctuation of the currencies. And this price includes your assessment up front and the debrief. So when you continue using it, there's kind of two ways to look at it. V is a perfect example. V works within a corporation. So she's an internal practitioner for some of her work. And there's others that she does that's her own private practice where she's also external. We got 2 accounts for her. So the price point for those internal, in fact, let me start. If any person that were to contact us directly, we say the cost of Leadership Circle profile is $500 per participating leader. Those that are certified get a discount immediately. If you're internal, you work within an organization, the discount to you is $390. If you're external, you get an extra $100 off, knowing that you joining, you're probably there on your own dime. You're probably not earning a salary while you're in our certification. You had some added costs of building business. We give you an added discount. And that difference between $390 and $500, if they came to us directly, or the $290 and such, is to give you a chance to put some extra dollars in to your proposals to be competitive with us. We ask everybody to consider this pricing of the suggested retail of $500. So we find that practitioners across the world, they're all on an even playing field for that. One last thing on pricing is the whole administration process. It's not hard to do. It's if you're familiar with other 360s, it's rather similar, rather user-friendly on a password portal. Some people just don't want to bother because you've got 10 leaders in there. They've each got about 10 to 15 evaluators. You're watching progress of lots of different evaluators. You're poking and reminding and prodding. You may not want to be bothered with that. And if that's the case, you can hand it over to us. And for an additional $100 per leader, we will manage that for you. It's called the concierge service. So if you're an external practitioner and you just want your coaching to be what you do and you don't want to worry about the administration, the charge per leader is $290 plus $100 for the concierge. I know there are questions around pricing. So often people have a very unique, unusual circumstance. So I'll be watching the chat when I'm done with my part here to see if there's anything I could do to add nuance. But this is a really important element to your decision. So please put in the chat box if you would like a specific question answered in an email, or if you'd like to talk one-on-one with any one of us, we'll be happy to follow up and help you understand the pricing, especially those of you maybe in different parts of the world. We can connect you with one of our peers in the various countries that you represent. As we wrap up and go to an open forum, our objective is for you to have the right information to make an informed choice. So if there's anything you want, please just type in the chat. I would like to have a follow-up, either an email to a question you have or a one-on-one meeting to discuss it. We're happy to meet with you, whether that's this week or next month or next year. If instead you're like, okay, this is everything I needed and I'm ready to register, you can go to our website. And it's leadershipcircle.com. You click on certifications. The one we're talking about specifically is the Leadership Circle profile. And this is the $4,395, the 3-day session. One of the chats was, how does this differ from other offerings on our website? So I'll clarify that briefly. The Leadership Circle assessment is the foundational, it's a prerequisite for other things that we do. So that we've been talking about today. On our calendar, you're also going to see collective leadership assessment. And just very briefly, same research, but instead of it being a 360 about each leader, it's a group survey. So people participate in the survey about how are we showing up collectively? And instead of it being self-evaluation versus raters, it's let's all answer the questions on how we are showing up collectively now versus how we would like it to be. So now versus future. So the CLA is an additional one-day certification, and the cost there is $995 US. So with that, before I do an open forum, Jonathan, is there anything I overlooked? Or Amanda, Carly, any open issues in the chat that we can address before we go to open questions?
I'd like to just address a few things, Michael. First, as Michael said, if you feel this is right for you, we invite you to register. And here's why. Most, if not all of our programs sell out months in advance. I have people contacting me pretty much every day asking to get on a wait list. And the truth is, since we've done this virtual program for the last 2.5 years, we have very few, if ever, having people cancel. So if you see a date you like, I encourage you to take it while it's still there. Secondly, we have 3 price points, actually. Michael mentioned our price, $43.95, that's regular pricing. If you register early, and if it's available on the website, $41.95 is early bird. And that goes away pretty quickly. Last minute is $45.95. We rarely get to that price. After this program, I'd like you to be on the lookout for emails that we're going to send to you with a survey because we want to get your feedback. So we'll also send you a link that you could send us questions for and a link to the calendar. And one last thing, and Amanda, I hope this is okay with you, that I want you to know we've done a test drive video. It's 28 minutes of suffering through my voice. This video explains how this tool is different from everything out there that you can choose, how we built it, the creative reactive framework, what the dimensions mean, how we score it. And then I model how I debrief it with a very controlling manager I'm sure everybody's come across. I use a real 360 report. I just changed the name. And this is something that we could send you a link to if you want to have some questions answered that you haven't yet asked, or some that will be reviewed that you've already asked during this program. So with that, I'd like to open this up to questions. So either raise your hand, do your chat, and let's open the gates.
I have a few questions that I've marked from the chat. A couple people have asked about clarification on pricing, what it looks like when coaches add in a debrief price on top of the LCP price, the difference between internal and external pricing, things like that. Could we touch base on pricing a little bit?
Yeah, let me take that one. Good question. Yeah, the costs we talked about today are the cost of the assessment itself. And there's been a few rare occasions where somebody didn't get the second part of this. So when you're working with a customer and you're proposing your business, you also have the cost of doing your work, your coaching, your preparation, whatever that is. Some people do it kind of as a piecemeal every step of it. Others are like a total 6-month package for this. So your coaching engagement, whether it's a couple sessions, a 3-month engagement, 6 months, is packaged at a certain price. And the leadership circle is one of the costs you want to make sure to bring into that. We get questions on that. So happy to talk with you one-on-one about kind of what you're aiming for, what your part of the world might see as reasonable. It's pretty fascinating. There's variance based on industry, based on leadership level, based on different geographies. So happy to discuss that with you one-on-one, but your cost is in addition to this for sure.
I'd like to just add one thing to that too, is most consultants and coaches I've spoken with who are certified with us never charge a separate price for the 360. They don't let the client compare apples and apples. They don't make it a commodity. They have it bundled in a contract, always, not sometimes, pretty much always, unless it's the feds. Federal government in the US often requires that separate pricing. So it's something for you to consider when you look at your overall contract proposals, how to bundle that in, making sure you're being paid with not only a markup, but for your time, of course.
Amanda, are there other questions?
Yeah, there are. Mike, you touched up based on this a little bit about the comparison between the LCP and other 360 assessments and other tools available to coaches. A couple of people specifically asked about the EQI,
Mhm.
and they also asked about how do you set apart the LCP 360 when someone might name like the DISC profile or the Franklin Covey like those types of assessments by name.
Awesome. Okay, good question. First of all, we don't assume that the leadership circle is exclusively the only thing you want to use. There are many practitioners we work with that might do a few different things in parallel. I personally just went through my Enneagram, and I'm working with my coach with my leadership circle insights and my Enneagram insights, and there's just this beautiful cross-pollination of insights for that. Some of the ones you mentioned, things like DISC, Strengths Finder, others, some of those are self-assessment, and some of them are, well, they're just self-assessment. So one of the things unique about us is the strength of the 360. Now, one of the questions in the chat was the power of the leadership circle as a solo. The leadership circle is a 360 instrument, but here's a nice surprise. If any of you are interested in just self-assessments only, you go to our website, theleadershipcircle.com. Just scroll down a half a page. We offer a free self-assessment. You could go in and play with that, just kind of get a feel for what the questions are, and you'll get a report. Secondly, we're just absolutely fine if you want to offer that invitation to some leaders you serve. I offer the self-assessment for a lot of the charitable work I do with adolescents. So it's not built to be a solo piece, but we do have one available, and it's at no charge. The real strength is the 360. What I might have to do is I don't know how, I don't know if I can speak intimately about the EQI, but if the question is important, if I get the question, I'll do a little bit of research in that we compete with all of these for sure. And I just sometimes feel like I might get them a little bit confused because there's dozens and dozens. So if I haven't answered EQI, drop it in the chat again, and Amanda will make sure that I do my research and give you an answer.
Okay,
Finally, the big difference between the leadership circle and others is most of them are either self-assessment or competencies, which are only the top half. We have the blend between the creative and the reactive. And before I let that question go, V,
Yep.
you use a lot of different assessments. What would you add there?
So I spent 11 years of my life working for Gallup and helped to build the Strengths Finder. So I have deep passion for positive psych, and actually pair Strengths Finder with Leadership Circle frequently and often, early and often. And the way that I've been able to do that is I actually still think about the that line that you saw in the center. So identity in the middle of the circle, reactive tendencies in the bottom, creative tendencies or creative competencies on the top. And I'll take the Strengths Finder language and talk about the negative and positive polarity. So every strength, right, the top 10 or 12 strengths will still have a reactive tendency and they have a creative competency. And so we can start to layer it up in terms of what are those deeply held beliefs, plus what are those strengths, and then how does that show up for how you are in complying, or where does that arrogance or distance show up, or how does that ambition or perfection show up when you have achiever, for example, as a top theme. So I think that and then this is where I think you have to have a practitioner community of others around you who are in a similar place of what are the ways to be able to manage the different tools in your coaching toolkit, and what is too much and what is the cadence to bring these out so that our clients are not feeling overwhelmed.
Two other things to round that out. The Leadership Circle, we are a company ourselves. And of course, we use the Leadership Circle profile as well as the collective leadership assessment, but we also use the Gallup surveys. So just another testament to the work we did. And I think V brought up a good point. Just be careful not to overdo it. There are customers, I kind of think, how many assessments are necessary to kind of get to the point? Thank you for that. Amanda, other questions?
I think you covered them.
I'm going to hit a few others I saw in the chat, and then we'll go to the open room. Currently, our certification is only offered remotely, and we are staying true to that for the time being. We want to start opening it back up to an open forum. We just built a new development center in our headquarters in Utah, like months before COVID hit. So we plan to, but we don't think it's ever going to get back to everything's going to be back in person. We plan to always have a virtual calendar with thoughts of those people that really want to be in person. We might offer that 3 to 6 times a year in North America and maybe once or twice a year in different regions of the world. There was a question about the leadership circle being used once and then used again. Typically, the leadership circle has a shelf life of maybe 18 months, 24 months. So we encourage people not to retake too soon. And there could be an organizational context or something that might encourage a little bit sooner, but typically retake 18 to 24 months is pretty normal. And you could look for shifts. The question in the chat was, is it an opportunity to then track progress? It is. But another thing that's also happening in the last couple of years is a great thing. The world and the context that we're in is also shifting. So I might be really leaning into a particular competency, but the world's complexity is going faster than my development is. So yes, progress, but you also perhaps could just say, here's the new baseline kind of given where things are today. And lastly, there's some questions about how this data is normed against our norm group. So very briefly, all the 124 questions are rated on a 5-point frequency scale. And so those raw scores are 1 data point. We also overlay it with our norm group. So how do these scores compare to, I don't know, I think it's 250,000 leaders across the world who have also taken this. And so that's presented as a percentile. So I can see on any given dimension, here's how I'm showing up as far as the frequency scale. Here's how I compare to leaders across the world. Just another data point to perhaps help illustrate, because unlike my previous career with only a competency base, I had countless conversations with people that are kind of now my age. You know, your coaching is at a 3.8 and people want to be at a 5, and there's the gap, and it wasn't very compelling. But if you can say people are seeing you coaching sometimes, but 75% of the people in our database are doing it more often than you are, that perhaps is a new way to look at things. So that's the value of the norm group. I'll stop there. With all that, why don't we just open up to open forum, show of hands. And Amanda, if you'll just kind of help us navigate the group.
Feel free
Anybody?
to come off mute if you have a question, or you can type it in the chat and I'm happy to read it out loud.
Sorry
Please.
to ask to repeat again on the 290, 390, 500. Can you just clarify internal, external again? I just
Thank
didn't
you.
get that.
You bet, Catherine. Thanks for that. The Leadership Circle has a retail price of $500 in the United States for participating leaders. Once people are certified, as some of you might choose to do as a result of this, if you're within a company, your price would be $390 US. If instead you own your own coaching practice and you do your own, get your own clients to do all that, your price would be $290.
Okay, so if I signed up right now to do it on my own, it would be 500. Or I'd have to work with a certified practitioner to do the debrief, right?
You got it.
I've done the solo one. I haven't done the 360.
Oh, good.
Okay, so then what if I do both? I have a coaching practice on the side of my full-time job. How does that work?
That's a V situation. She's set up in our database 2 different ways.
Okay.
And there are times where she's launching projects within the company that employs her. And there's other times where she is running projects out of the company that she owns. So it's very, very common. And to your point, Catherine, if you decided you wanted to do a 360 assessment, you're always welcome to, first of all. And just know that we can hook you up with a practitioner, maybe you know one. They will charge you their rates and perhaps a little bit more for their prep. But also know that if you decide to come to certification, you're going to be getting a debrief also. So, you want to think, how much do I need to think about before I actually go to certification? We don't want you to do that twice. And lastly, as I was in chat and had a chance to look at some of you in the room, some of you are employed within some of our largest global companies. So while you heard me say 390, don't be surprised if some of you, who you are, we might have worked out special contracting with your global procurement team for discounted rates based on volume. Catherine, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, Janet, I think you had a few questions. I want to make sure that we get to your questions as well. One, I think, was about just, one was about the element around how does this database show up in terms of honoring diversity, I think was one of the questions. I'm not naming that as well as you wrote it into the chat, but if you could bring voice to that, that'd be great.
Thank you, Viv, for bringing that to the surface. Yeah, I was just curious, sort of how you think about this assessment through kind of a multicultural lens, especially given the climate that we're in now. And so I'd just be curious how the assessment holds up under that lens.
V, do you care to take a start?
I'll tell you, and so actually Mike and a handful of us are going to be getting together on March 23rd to go deeper into this particular question. What I've noticed over time, and so I've probably done at this point 40 or 50 feedbacks. And what I notice is that in the qualitative feedback, especially, just very quickly in the US, how the qualitative component, I see a variation in how we give feedback to women and how we give feedback to men, for example. Mm-hmm. So I do ask questions about that, right, in terms of socialization and organizational culture and how a leader is responding to that particular data. Mike, you'll have some better technical answers to this, but I do very specifically take into account leaders, people of color, those who have identified in terms of gender identity or sexual orientation. And we talk a lot about the organizational culture, and it shows up beautifully in the data set. And you can start to see where, for example, a person of color might be making others uncomfortable. And so then therefore, how does that individual leader interpret that? What does that do for them? What does that do in terms of moments where maybe their deeply held beliefs are really being tested? And accommodations that they've had to make. So it makes for a really rich coaching conversation. That's how I've led that, Mike and Jonathan. What would you add to that, Mike?
Yeah, I'll offer just a couple of things. And Amanda, you very likely have a few data points as well. This question is becoming more and more prevalent. And if we are going to stand on the validation of our instrument as one of our significant differentiators, we have a responsibility to always tend to this. So while we're always doing validation, we're doing a much more significant validation on this very subject. And two ones, we have a task force of active users who are more specialized and who represent the different groups we're talking about, and we're giving feedback. We're also going through quite a remarkable study about re-looking at some of the questions. We haven't done that in years, but re-looking at some of the questions and either broadening, expanding them, or contracting them a bit to better respect some of the things there. A baby step, but it was a few years ago. There was a time where our survey was by he, she, and based on customer feedback, we expanded it to be, genericized on gender. So that, and then finally, under the leadership of Aronde Sadeku Creighton, our Chief Diversity Officer, he is working with our research team on the validation. We've got a recent study to confirm there's limited bias, and where there is bias, we know what it is and are honest and help you as coaches know about it, so you can weave a little bit. We also know that the competency, while it's global in nature, some of these competencies have more oomph or less oomph in different regions of the world. So there's also some things about, this complying I was talking about, not real prevalent and useful in my view, but you go to a different part of the world, a female person from Asia Pacific, for example, that's more the norm. So we have data that way. So finally, to wrap it all up, we're actively in progress. And while we're doing all that, the biggest part we can contribute there, and V, I know you are all over this, so please punctuate, and then I'll see what Amanda has to say, is how you bring this in. So one thing that surprises people, unlike other 360s, we talk about narrative identity at the very front end of a debrief. And so we create the context about who you are, the context you work in, the world you live in, the environment you're with. So as some of those things, as they punctuate, is of high importance, we bring that in, and then we use the data in the 360 only in areas that serve that.
So I'll lead every debrief with two questions typically. One is, where does your leadership identity originate? What are those deeply held beliefs that you have about leadership, right? And then that goes off into a beautiful conversation about sometimes it was my parents or that second grade teacher, or sometimes it's the here's who I knew, who I didn't want to be like, right, in terms of leadership. And then the second question is, what is the organizational context for your leadership right now? What's the enterprise demand that's based on you, that is being placed on you right now? And where do you feel like you're not being able to deliver? So where do you feel like you're really have a gap? And where do you think you're doing a beautiful job, better than most? And that gets us both into the reality of it, but also into the appreciative inquiry component. And then for my personal feedback, and I'll never forget how beautifully my coach worked me through this. They asked me a question like, what are the three chapter headers? How would you title the 3 chapter headers that really define your leadership journey? Like, decade by decade or season over season. And I've used that at times depending upon what feels right for each leader. But those are great opening questions. And then the data kind of leads itself. And I would say finally, there's a lot to consume. So Mike, your point is really a big one that I want to amplify, which is what are the 1 or 2 places on this profile, you leader, that you'd like to develop, that you'd like to dig into more? They're still leading.
Thank you, V. Amanda, you're close to some of the internal workings. Anything else that hasn't been, anything you'd like to add to this important conversation?
No, I think that you and V really covered it very beautifully. It's an ongoing learning process for us all.
Thank you. And Janet, while you invited the question, we're dealing with that every single day. So is there anything more you'd like to say about your question?
I don't think so. I appreciate what Amanda just said. That was my sense from your response, right? We're all kind of on this journey together, learning. And so I appreciate that the organization is doing that as well. And, I think whenever there's a more standardized assessment, right, the concern is both around bias of questions, but also that underlying framework, right? Is it a white male version of leadership that is the base foundation that guided the development of the assessment? So I think that's, probably the deepest question that I have about most things I'm trying to do as a white woman leader myself. So I appreciate the openness to have the conversation, and V, for you lifting up my question from early in the chat. So
I appreciate that. One final thing, just to wrap this up, and V mentioned there's a group of us getting together. There's this insight we had a couple of weeks ago. I had recently done a debrief. I thought it went great. The client said it went great. All was good, but they were different than me in lots of different ways. So I thought it was great, and they said it was. And it was like, would I have known otherwise? Like, what would have happened if V was doing the debrief versus me? Or if a person who was of her race, like what might they have seen? What have been invited? What might have been okay to talk about? What would have been safe? What might have been the different development path? Like, we don't know. So often as coaches, we do our work in a vacuum. So that question is percolating. What can we do to honor and appreciate all the complexity of all this? So appreciate the conversation.
thank you.
Other questions?
Mike, there's one that's just popped in about a team assessment into chat.
Great. Team assessment. We have, I mentioned it briefly, I'll talk about it again. Okay. The leadership circle framework that we've talked about, the 29 competencies and so forth, we've described as a 360 assessment. My self-assessment as a leader versus those who evaluate me. We have another tool called the collective leadership assessment, which is the same model. But here it is. I'm a member. I'm one of 12 people on this executive team, and we're all answering about us. And we're answering it twice. Once about how we see ourselves currently and how we would like to be. And so the gap analysis, the consulting around, here's what you all said you're experiencing with each other as a group now versus what you want to do as one development path. You could also invite others in the organization. So would all of you or a subgroup of you give feedback to the 12 executives, how they're doing across these 29 domains? So that's called the collective leadership assessment. And that is the additional one-day certification that you'll see on our calendar side by side with the prerequisite of the 3-day leadership circle. Other questions?
I think we're at that point. Mike?
Yeah, tell you what, I'm going to stay on. I believe my teammates will as well. If you've got something that's just so peculiar and you just don't want to ask it in front of 20 people, we're going to stick around. But as we thank you and say goodbye, please take a final thought. Is there anything that we would want to know that would help you regarding any next steps? Feel free to chat. Feel free to stay in the room. Feel free to request a conversation, whatever would be useful to you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the rich conversation.
Thanks for joining us.